Welcome to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.
Hello and welcome to the Landwards podcast. I'm your host and editor of Landwards magazine, Andy Newbold, and I am joined today by eminent agricultural engineer, occasional musician, it's probably fair to say, and long-time IR Green member and supporter, Hugh Crabtree. Hello, Hugh.
Hi there, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you, and I'm very, very grateful for you very kindly agreeing to take part in the podcast, Hugh. Should we start from the beginning, whatever the beginning is, as you see it? Hugh, tell us a little about your background.
Well, it's a very good place to start, to quote the immortal words of some song in some movie from millions of years ago. I don't come from a farming family. I come from a family of lawyers. So you might wonder what I'm doing in agriculture, but the truth of the matter is that as a nipper, I used to like going around to the farm next door in the Yorkshire Dales in a lovely part of Wharfdale called Kettlewell, and help with the lambing and do a bit of milking on farm. And during other summer holidays, I also worked on another dairy farm down in Buckinghamshire. And the third farm that I had contact with belonged to my uncle and aunt in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland, way, way, way before any of the troubles, of course. And in fact, my first visit to that farm, I was aged 7 and flew from Yeadon Airport to Nuts Corner in Belfast, where my aunt met me. I was very well looked after in the back of the Dakota by the air stewardesses. And on all three of those farms, my keenest interest was to get behind the wheel of anything that had an engine on it. So my interest in agriculture, I worked my cap off in all of those farms, as long as there was the prospect of getting to drive something on the farm. So my first tractor drive was on a David Brown Cropmaster in Northern Ireland, age 7. And thus began my love affair with machinery, with engines. So that was my interest in agriculture. And I spotted an opportunity to extend this, and I decided to apply to Reading University to do a degree in general agriculture at Reading. My housemaster at school said, So Crabtree, he said, you think the answer lies in the soil, do you? And I said, well, sir, I'm not sure, but I think it probably does, yes. So I wasn't much of an academic at school and flunked my A-levels the first time of asking, so went round again, did rather better and managed to talk my way into Reading. Having done all that agricultural work during my school holidays, I persuaded them that I didn't need to do a year on farm, which they usually made people do if they hadn't come from a farming family. So I went straight up to university in 1972, did the prelim year because I was in the Thickies group, having not got very good A-level results, and then in my final year specialised in agricultural engineering. And agricultural engineering at Reading University was not really a spanners kind of course. It was all a bit philosophical. For example, one of my exam questions in my finals was, design yourself. Can you suggest a design for a chewing gum manufacturing plant? And another one was how much energy could we extract from the River Thames? And I fortunately had remembered the equation and worked it all out down to absolute zero. And just as I was about to end the question, I realised what an idiot I'd been. So I added a sentence which said, this is the theoretical amount of energy we could extract from the River Thames, but long before we'd got to this point, it would have frozen up. And Alf Parrott, who ran a boat hire business down in Henley, probably would be a bit upset.
And do you think that answer sort of counted in your favour, Hugh?
Well, it must have done, because I got a first-class honours degree off the back of that.
Marvellous. I'm just scribbling on my pad and taking a guess at your age. Just to suffice to say, when you went up to Reading, I was turning 1. Let's put it that way. And for the answers on a postcard, if any listener wants to come in with a guess, there'll be a Mars bar or something if you get both right for the age gap between Hugh Crabtree and Andy Newbold. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Okay. Well, by then I was 19, so that answers the question. Sorry about that.
No. It's all good stuff. So you've kind of hit on a nutshell why you wanted to become an agricultural engineer on the basis that, I think in line with a lot of little boys who like toy tractors and big tractors, and little girls as well, I hasten to add, you kind of hit the nail on the head as to motivation. From Reading onwards, where did it take you?
I completed my first degree and qualified with a BSc HONS, and I'd been already getting into messing about with transport and events and music. By then I'd got into running a ceilidh band whilst I was still an undergraduate. And so I didn't really have a very clear idea of what next, but because I'd had a good degree, and the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and Food, as it still was then, was generously offered me a postgrad studentship. And I set off looking at recovering waste energy from power stations for carp production. That lasted about a week because MAF suddenly realised they'd got a couple of other people doing that, and maybe they'd got enough people doing studentships on that. So then I got roped into working with the epidemiology group at Reading University to look at recording schemes for pig health recording. That was the same group that had successfully created the DAISY system, the Dairy Information System, using mini computers, which were still the size of the battleship Potemkin. And
size of a mini, obviously.
A mini, yeah.
Deceptive title there, mini computer, so called because of scale, not because it's small.
Yeah, absolutely. We were still using, 7-inch or 9-inch floppy disks, And that didn't last very long either, because working interestingly with the Cambac group of pig farmers locally, who were a lot of the original PIC pig farmers, it was all taking a bit too long to get organised. So at the third time of asking, there was a message here, and perhaps I should have given up, but for the third time of asking, I then set about looking at adding numbers to the thermal performance of pig buildings with my then PhD supervisor, Jeff Owen, who was quite a well-known ag engineer working in buildings at the time. Now, it probably will come as no surprise to you that my interest in driving stuff and music sort of got in the way of my studies. And so my PhD languishes in the loft of this house, gathering dust. I never submitted a thesis.
Waiting for the right time to finish you. There's nothing wrong with that. I can relate.
Well,
all in good time. It's gestating.
I think it's fair to say it's a bit late now. But I shared a room with a guy called Nick Bird. He was doing some interesting work building loggers to log energy in trees. So the agricultural engineer, he was another agricultural engineer, and we were looking at how much energy does a tree consume when it's respiring away, and as many of the listeners will know, there's quite a lot of energy going on with respiring plants, and so it was an interesting piece of work to see if we could recover any of that. And so he and I had already set up our own little business, hiring PA systems to local rock bands. And by then, Jeff Owen, who'd been doing a bit of consultancy work and had designed the ventilation system and was casting around for some way of commercializing it. So the three of us and another engineer at Reading University, David Brooke, and a guy who had an electronics business called Harry Butterworth, whose brother Bill Butterworth is a well-known agricultural engineering journalist, still around. The five of us decided we would set up a business to make Jeff Owen's research available commercially. So that's what we did in 1979, and in 1980, Farmex Limited was born. The full name of the company being Farm Energy and Control Services Limited, but Farmex obviously rather easier to remember and
slightly
say.
snappier.
Yes. And so I got sort of sucked into, through my project, I did a lot of work on pig farms locally. I particularly worked with the Beecrofts on the Downs. My uncle Bob Beecroft, as I came to call him, was an interesting chap. He had 1,000 sows indoors and 1,000 sows outdoors, was quite remarkable in that regard. And I also did some, during that time I was working with Colin Whittemore at Edinburgh University, who had invented, as I'm sure many will know, the Edinburgh model pig. And it was he who was looking for numbers to put into the Edinburgh model pig to score the thermal quality of the environment in which pigs were being kept. You've gone quiet, Andy.
It's the Edinburgh model pig, Hugh. That's what it is. I'm conjuring now. I'm conjuring. So fast forwarding through Farmex, our paths did cross. I said sort of outside of this interview, I jokingly said I think the first time I met Hugh was in about 1992 when I was in placement at the Farm Energy Centre, at Farm Electric Centre at Stoneleigh, and a gentleman in a selection of different waistcoats used to come in and sort of abuse other members of staff, who subsequently became known as Hugh Crabtree, and we've sort of, become mates through I Agree ever since, really. Let's fast forward. Given that possibly the salad days of your career are over now, Hugh, shall we say, given the timeline we discussed earlier, what does your day job look like now?
Farmex was originally 5 ex-academics. We started employing people. I was sort of generally managing the business from the get-go. And inevitably, having celebrated our 40th anniversary last year, there have been a number of changes of structure. And to cut a very long story short, I am now the last remaining sole owner of Farmex Limited, with the sad demise and death of Nick Bird in 2013. I, if you like, sort of inherited all of that good work that was done back into the 70s and early 80s. I have a co-director, but basically Farmex is now mine. So and in the more recent years, the people that I employed, the first guy that we employed was still at school when we employed him. We did a sort of youth opportunities job with him, a guy called Chris May, who actually is Farmex to a lot of people because he knows more about the business than I do. And between him and another agricultural engineer who's a member of the institution, Simon Leach, those two and a couple of others run the sort of engine room of the business, the production. And they do all of that without any real interference from me. In fact, they far prefer it that way. So my role now is, I believe it's called business development. So I'm looking for opportunities to spread the word about the technology that we have and that we are developing. So I'm making links with, through associations, and trying to exploit any networking opportunities. I attend, events and so on, always looking for opportunities to apply the knowledge that we've got, as well as the sort of blindingly obvious stuff of acting as a simple sales rep for our network of dealers around the UK, and also managing our export business to the States, where we send about 25% of what we manufacture.
I think you're probably doing yourself down ever so slightly, Hugh, as a professional agricultural engineer by referring to yourself as the salesman. But Should we jump sideways? Given that our paths have crossed through sort of my placement and your work and the institution of Ag Engineers, which is a sort of shared life we have together, what role does volunteering play in your life?
Well, it's reasonably significant actually, because I got drawn into industry representation. This is pig industry representation way back. So the National Pig Breeders Association, if you please, the NPBA, was obviously an association of pig breeders at the time, and it was developing its commercial producer wing. And at the same time, they had the bright idea of involving the allied industries with, obviously as a mechanism to grow their subscription revenue. But also they realized that there was an important role being played by allied industry companies in developing the future of the industry. So I got involved with that, and it wasn't very long before, I was serving on the relevant committee. And when that morphed into the British Pig Association, I ended up chairing the Allied Industry Group in that. And then coming forward a bit in the year of our Lord 2000, the NFU Pigs Committee and the British Pig Association's commercial pig producers combined to form the National Pig Association. And I was one of the people who was very much involved in the formation of the MPA, and indeed was the first vice chairman of the MPA and was the first chairman of the MPA's Allied Industries Group. And so that thread has run more or less throughout my time in the industry. Also around about that time, I signed up for the Institution of Agricultural Engineers. I've always felt that agricultural engineers have a really important role to play in the application of technology in all agricultural undertakings, but obviously my particular bent has been in livestock production. But there's a hugely important role in acting as the communications go-between between the prime producer, whether that's an arable farmer or a livestock farmer, and the technology and technologists that are, if you like, the other side of the farm gate. And
being the bridge.
Yeah,
being the bridge.
Absolutely, being the comms bridge, understanding enough about the real world of farming to translate the problem into terminology that the technologists can understand, and helping facilitate the provision of a solution to farmers. And that, going forward, is absolutely the role that agricultural engineers need to be playing as we apply all this technology to food production.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more, and I mean, we haven't got 7 hours, just to warn you in advance. Tell us a little bit more about your professional discipline of the world of pigs and monitoring technology.
Well, we, from the get-go of Farmex, have tried to engineer working and satisfactory solutions to the challenge of temperature regulation. Very briefly, there's a close relationship both in pigs and poultry between feed energy use and environmental temperature and growth. So if you get it right, you maximize efficient growth. If you get it wrong, the animals are either using too much feed to keep warm, or if you get it wrong the other way, they go off eating because it's too hot, they lose their appetite. So temperature regulation, really important. When we started putting computers into pig buildings to do this job, the amount of code required to do the temperature regulation was about a dozen lines. The human interface between the machine and setting it, that part, is pages of code because it's quite a challenge to get the...
There's a lesson there, isn't there, Hugh? There's something in that statement you just made which none of us want to accept.
No, but it's the truth. But also what happens is when you then find that there's a regulation which says you've got to have an alarm system, and an efficient way of achieving that is to network these computers and then have one of them on the network policing the network and ringing a bell if something goes wrong. It's not very long before someone has the bright idea about what else could we be looking at while we're doing that principal function. So a very clever chap who was one of our main dealers, a guy called Mike McLaughlin, said, would it be possible for your controllers to have a meter in them which told us how successful they were being in achieving the results that the farmer was asking them to achieve? And what a brilliant question. So we put a thing called the performance meter into our controllers. And I'm here to tell you that when we let them run for a year or so, and we ended, there were a lot of controllers in the field, so we had about 100 concurrent years of data. And when we analysed that data, we fell off our seats because it was jaw-dropping. We realised, having come from academia and having thought we knew all about how to design buildings to do the job, it turned out we knew, I'm going to use a slightly agricultural term here now, Mr. Newbold, we actually turned out to know bugger all about how buildings actually performed. And it was very, very sobering and very humiliating, actually, but very humbling. So real simple question, how long does your average piggery spend at minimum ventilation rate? That question answered from this meter. And we, like everybody else, thought, oh, well, it'd be around about 10%, won't it? Because that's where we set the minimum ventilation rate. Well, it isn't. On average, across all buildings we monitored, it's nearly half the time is spent at minimum ventilation rate. And in buildings that have supplementary heat provided, it's more like 90% of the time. Well, for goodness sakes, 90% of the time at minimum ventilation rate, a setting which is set manually by the user, what's the point of having a controller if it's all manual? Really interesting new insight. So then by this time, the Americans were talking to us. We'd managed to establish a bit of stuff in the States, and they really wanted to start recording things like feed use and water and energy and that sort of thing. So we started collecting data remotely from networks of controllers in the States, and that was in the year of our Lord 1996. So for a very long time now, we've been collecting data remotely from the field, and that's just completely changed everything. We used to be approached by people saying, "What do you think about this? Can you provide a solution?" And we would hum and ha and try and apply our expertise to it, what we'd taught, what we'd learnt at school and so on. These days, the answer is, what's the data telling us? Have we got any data? It's completely changed how we approach providing solutions to people.
And actually, going back to good old Donald Rumsfeld, who I'm apologise for referring to, you're finding loads of things you didn't know, presumably, when you start down this road.
The unknown unknowns.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Given your not inconsiderable experience and career timeline to date, where do you see agricultural engineering going?
Well, we've obviously got the current thread of the spanner and hammer people developing big machinery for big mechanisation. But that is now being heartily challenged by a move in the direction of autonomous operation. And everything's going to get littler again with the application of technology. So there's big opportunities in robotics and
going big in small scale.
Yes, absolutely. So that end of the job on arable farming is very exciting times for agricultural engineering, and masses of opportunity in the nitty-gritty of engineering, design and fabrication, manufacture, service, etc. But associated with all of that is a flow of data such as we've not yet seen, huge amounts of data coming from all agriculture. So another role for agricultural engineers is to be that bridge, to be that human,
the interpreter,
to do that human interpretation, to hold the hands of the prime producer who, for all their willingness to innovate in the field, like to have their hands held and need to have their hands held in extracting maximum value from those data flows, because a big pile of numbers worth not a diddly squat until someone turns them into knowledge and then turns that knowledge into profit.
Absolutely. I think someone once said about data, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, isn't it? And I think we're in a world where there is going to be an unprecedented flood of data because we have the technology to get it. And at the moment, there's an awful lot of people shrugging and going, right, what do we do with this now? And that's the pressure point, or that's the point where ag engineers sit, as far as I'm concerned, is decision support, interpretation, and meaning.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's a very, very well established agricultural principle that you can't control what you don't measure. And we live that. That's my job. That's our job. I mean, I know we manufacture control equipment and I know we do a distribution job and so on and so on and so forth. But actually, what we are doing is trying to help our end users, system end users, to make better use of that stuff which we are measuring and to do a more effective job on the ground. And the other absolute principle that we've built our business on is that it's the biology that matters. We're trying to engineer systems around a piece of biology. I know it's very exciting to build a new building, and we all get excited about that. But actually what we're talking about is trying to make the lot of the biology better, both from a health point of view, a welfare point of view, and a production point of view.
No, agree with that completely. Moving on, in the same vein, what do you think the key issues are going to be facing ag engineering? What are the challenges to our chosen career or our discipline, if that's not too strong a phrase? What's coming in on the edges?
Well, obviously from the immediate past remarks, just lots and lots of technical challenges for agricultural engineering. There aren't enough agricultural engineers in amongst the development consideration that's going on at the moment, and we may want to come back to that. But also, all of this information that's flying around the place, needless to say, is being looked at and picked apart by the good old consumer. And the good old consumer contains a range of perception and attitude and belief. And the influence of the consumer through food retailers is getting increasingly important. So a real challenge, is how do we marry up all of these drivers? Is it the environment that's the driver? Is it animal welfare that's the driver? Is it the starving millions that's the driver? What is it? And agricultural engineers have a hugely important part to play in trying to help the process of figuring all that out. And the particular challenge of getting enough food produced, the good old sustainable intensification phrase that's in widespread use. We see a growing voice against farmed animals, intensively farmed meat protein, for example. But it's the way we've got to go, and we've got to demonstrate through the application of agricultural technology and through really imaginative and innovative engineering that actually the housed beast is pretty well looked after, and that we can monitor behavior traits in housed livestock which indicate that the welfare is actually good. They aren't freezing to death out in a field. They're actually nice and warm. They've got good access to feed and water, etc., etc., etc. And I personally think that we are going to end up with process control and monitoring systems that take a big account of the biology's input. So I can see a day when we've got voting bars in piggeries where the pigs themselves are nudging a bar in order to influence the environment in which they are kept.
So a sort of a red pig, an amber pig, and a green pig, with a smiling pig and an unhappy pig. Like as you come out of the loo on the motorway service and you tap the satisfaction counter on the smiley face, the equivalent for the pig.
Absolutely. There's a famous group in the University of Illinois that looked into training pigs to use a cursor positioning device on a screen in order to get feeding rewards. And this was an experiment a university in California had done with chimpanzees. It turned out that pigs beat the chimps to the speed of working this thing out. The Illinois University guys rang up the Californian designers of the experiment and said, okay, what next? Our pigs are doing it. They said, what do you mean your pigs are doing it? You've only had the system for 3 months. So, the pigs can learn and be trained to do all sorts of stuff. And I think the day could very well dawn that we've got pigs that, go and weigh themselves, go and, almost treat themselves, but certainly give us some feedback on how they're doing.
That is absolutely fascinating. Now, I'm going to use the great radio phrase now. And finally, Hugh, what advice would you offer to anyone considering heading into ag engineering as a career?
Very simple, do it. And by all means, if you've got a clear idea about what you want to do, pick a school that delivers on that. If you're a spanner person or particularly interested in tech, Harper Adams University, great place to go. University that still has an engineering school rather, that does a bit of spanner wielding as well as a bit of tech. But there are others, of course. There's really interesting stuff emerging in Lincoln on robotics. And Newcastle's still busy, obviously, in that bioengineering. But my key message is, if you're thinking about it, do it. And if you're not sure that you're a spanner person or indeed, an electronics person or anything like that, never mind. There's a really, if you're someone who's interested in data and food production, but don't particularly want to be at the other end of an oil can or a soldering iron, there's still a role to be played in data interpretation in food production at all levels in the food chain.
You heard it here first, and Hugh, I 100% agree with you. Well, you have been listening to the Landwards podcast today, and we have been joined by Hugh Crabtree, eminent agricultural engineer, and it has been a treat, Hugh. Thank you very much for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You're very welcome, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it myself too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We'll be back with another podcast in due course.
For more information, visit www.iagri.org. You have been listening to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.